What is up, everybody? Welcome to Mile High Market Mastery Live. We are ready to rock and roll, and today we are going to be talking about new builds. And this is something that we really need to sit back and focus on because it's absolutely incredible the amount of deals and conversations that I have had about this exact topic. So, Mile High Market Mastery Live. I'm Jeremy. I'm a real estate agent. I'm going to talk on here, but I would love it if you would comment below and interact a little bit with what we're doing because it absolutely helps me get things moving along. So if you do have a comment, please post it. Hopefully on one of these screens in front of me, I'll see it. But I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help you. If you have an agent and you're working with them, great. Stay with them. This is not an attempt to lure you into working with me or any of that, but it is just from my heart what's going on in the market. I love talking about the market. I study the market. And if you or anyone you know are interested in buying a home, selling a home, that's when I would love to talk to you. Please comment, send me a DM, and we can roll. So families are looking beyond Denver's housing market because of affordability. And all of a sudden, new homes are, more affordable than some of the resale homes. This is a relatively new trend, and it's not necessarily the price tag because new home prices and home prices are staying pretty stable considering the market and the low amount of transactions that we've closed over the last 18 months, 2 years. And the truth is that builder incentives are propping up prices. And honestly, like it feels a little 2008 to me. So let's talk about this. I want to have the opportunity for you to proceed with caution. We're going to unpack it, the good, the bad, the ugly, new builds versus resale. So let's get rolling. So first and foremost, there was a great market reversal, right? We've seen it. We've felt it. Agents have felt it. Ultimately, we are plugging along with crazy amounts of appreciation, unsustainable amounts of appreciation over the last 4 or 5 years. 2020 through 2023 were kind of the golden years. And then we saw it kind of slow down, right? And the slowdown got real in 2024 when we sold less sides of transactions than we have sold since 1995. And this year looks even lower. So all of a sudden, people stopped moving. And the reason was interest rates, right? We kind of came off the COVID thing. Everybody was kind of still working remote. And then all of a sudden, people are starting to go back to work. And they don't need the dual offices anymore in the homes. And they don't need the extra space. And, all of a sudden, how quickly we forget how quickly that came on. And so it changed, right? And so I serve the Northern Colorado market and the Denver market. And, there's existing home sales are now existing home sales are now more expensive than new construction, right? A national average 413,500 for new construction versus 422,600. When we talk real estate, the huge hyper metrics don't really matter. Like, to be completely honest with you, because it's completely different across the board. And yes, Northern Colorado seems to be extremely new home build heavy because they are expanding. It's not just Fort Collins and Greeley now. We have Windsor, Johnstown, Tinmouth, Loveland, Severance. All of those areas are expanding rapidly where, there was actually space to build. The same thing is happening in Denver. It's just, Eastern Aurora. And, as we go northern, we're kind of basically marrying Denver and Fort Collins with the new construction with all those, farmlands and things falling off. So that's absolutely something that is noted. And so as we kind of go, we start looking at these new builds. And here's the thing. There are costs with new builds. Not recently, but there's all kinds of things to consider, right? The taxes. Is there an HOA or is it a metro district? What's a metro district? Well, a metro district is pretty much an HOA attached to your taxes. Yes, I know all you guys out there shouting at the screen. a metro district is, essentially put in place to help build the infrastructure. But then some of that infrastructure is coffee shops and parks and rec centers and all pools within that, right? So, the metro district tax is supposed to, alter after 20 years. But it's, for putting the sidewalks, for putting the streets, for putting all that infrastructure in so quickly, it's just basically paying that back over time. And then it's supposed to change after 20 years. Here's the deal. By the time 20 years happen, right, the taxes are going to be so dang high, it might just be, a wash. We'll see. But the bottom line is metro districts do exist. And you could buy a home that is not in an HOA, but is part of a metro district that has similar amenities that a detached HOA might have. And yes, there's no HOA, but there is covenants, right? And there are rules. And so it's essentially a different model to, prop up the community within that. So watch out for these metro districts. I think they kind of get a bad rap ultimately. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world, but there are certain things that you do have to know when you're going into a metro district. When you're going into a new build, you could just talk about taxes. What do the taxes look like? Is a metro district included in that tax number or not? Right? Because you walk into a new build construction office and you're expecting a, 0.5% tax rate, and you get hit with a 1.5% tax rate, and you're like, what? On the sales price? That's crazy. And you've already moved in, you got the great incentives, you got the no down payment, and then boom, here comes your tax bill, and it's double what you thought what you paid at your last house. And so you have to be very upfront with that. And that's, reason number one, that you want to have an agent who can look at all these things so you understand that cost. When I'm working with clients, the number one thing that I talk about is this monthly payment, right? Metro districts, HOA, taxes, all of that, insurance, depending on where you're at, could be a little bit difficult. But all of those things are not really included in that, mortgage and principal payment that the lender gives you. And then they stack all these things on, and all of a sudden your payments doubled or tripled. And you're like, whoa, what's going on? Yes, you still qualify, but does it really make sense? So that's one thing to really nail down, is that. And so when we look to Northern Colorado, there are certainly deals that happen, and there's a ton of infrastructure coming up there. There's a ton of, possibilities, and all these companies considering moving to Weld County and Larimer County and all of that. But that's in the future. Those newer towns up there are very financially savvy as well. In fact, at one point, Windsor had an incredible amount of, money in reserves as they're going. Maybe because some of the metro districts, I don't know. We're not going to go there, but you have to understand that there is opportunity there, and that's where a lot of the new builds are. There's everything from luxury to, a basic starter home in the new construction realm, probably within a 20 or 30-minute radius, depending on where you're at. Most of the, growth is happening east of I-25, north of 34, but it's, kind of going everywhere as we go. So there's certainly opportunity there. Northern Colorado is not the only place, but since the prices are relatively a little bit lower than Denver overall, the new builds are also a little bit less expensive there. And then we need to talk about this, because everybody's draw right now is to new construction for the purpose of these incentives. And I see agents all the time out there posting, friends of mine, everything like, you can get a rate 3.99%, you can get 4.25, you can get all these things. Now, I want you to proceed with caution when we're talking about this, because what is happening is the prices are staying stable. So even though we've had a little bit of a rough market, yes, I know some have come down, but the builders, there hasn't seen a huge decrease. What they are doing is saying, hey, look at this fancy monthly payment. We'll buy down your rate because we're buying billions of dollars of loans. And so we've already pre-purchased them at this, specific rate. And so we can sell them to you at this rate. Now, I mean, we're talking $50,000 on a $650,000 purchase, right? And they're doing this, and sometimes they're even pushing the limit because they're paying they're basically saying, okay, you have to be in a certain amount of loan to get the most, right? An FHA can have 6% closing costs paid, right? So if you're getting an FHA loan, you can get 6% of the purchase price as a concession to use to buy down the rate. A VA is 4%. Conventional is different, varied on how much you're putting down. 3% with less than 10%, 6% with 10 to 25% down, and 9% with 25% down. So a lot of times they see that FHA as the option. So people are saying, oh, well, I want 6%, to go towards that. And that's, when you're talking about, a $650,000 property, that's a $40,000 concession that you can get, $39,000 if you go FHA. So they're saying, okay, we'll list at 650, which maybe the house should be worth, but sell for about 610, but we'll give you a $40,000 incentive on that. And what that's going to do is it's going to buy your rate down to 5% or 4.5% or whatever it is. Well, what we've just done is essentially pay $650,000 for a home that's worth 610. Yes, there's appraisals, but appraisers understand. They know what the concessions are. They see all of that stuff, and take from it what you will. But that's something that we have to look at. And so then that house sells for $650 with a $40,000 concession. Then the next house sells for $660 with a $50,000 concession, or whatever it is. 50 is probably too high based on what I just said about the max concession. But that's great. And then you see the monthly payment and you're like, okay, this is great, right? I got the monthly payment to $3,000 or below. That's what I was trying to do. And then here comes the metro district, right? And you're like, okay, well, that's great. Or the taxes go up, or it's in an insurance place and after a year that is high risk. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, that rate's great, but I have all these other costs that's coming into it. But the problem here is if you're not fully aware of it, what you also did was take an FHA loan that has to be refinanced if you're going to get the mortgage insurance taken off, right? So once you refinance, the loan goes away. So be very careful about this as we go, because if you're, maybe a traditional buyer with 10% down, 3%, I mean, you can get a conventional to 10 to 25%. That's great. But you have to be very careful about how that works. So if you have 5 or 7.5 or, just below 10%, they're going to say, hey, you should take this FHA loan. You can still put 10% down, but this is what that looks like. And then we have to really step back and see, because ultimately people that like new home construction want new again. And for some reason, a lot of times in this population, they want this new house and they live in it for a year or two. They don't like the HOA. They don't like the metro district. They don't like their neighbors. The house isn't perfect because they bought on the incentive, not on the house and the lifestyle. And then they want to move. Well, now we're going to start to hit, since these big incentives have been around for a year, going on 2, where these people are like, oh, I need to move. I need a bigger house, or I don't like this house for whatever reason. And we're going to have to be like, well, okay, well, you bought it for $650 and you had that huge thing, and now they're still selling them for $650 or $675 and offering bigger incentives, or the problem is, even if it does tick up, the truth is that people have to drive by the flags. They have to drive by the fact that they're going to have a lower interest rate, which gets everybody right now. It's the hot topic. And then they have to realize that they can buy a house that no one's ever lived in. And then they have to turn around and be like, oh, I'm going to go buy yours if you want to move up. And while the prices were increasing heavily over the last, 10 years, I'll even say, some of these people were able to move around and get away with it, right? Because appreciation was so good. We were moving along. They were getting this incentive. They were okay with breaking even or making, a little bit of money, and then they would move on. Well, now, since we flatlined a little bit and homes are here, maybe their price is just ticking up and the incentives are getting bigger. Well, you're technically financing that $50,000, right? So all I want you to do, if you're talking to a builder's lender and you're like, hey, what if they just took $40,000 off the price? Because to them, the net's the same. What would that look like? Ask that question, because likely you'll probably refinance at some point. You'll probably need, to take a little bit of money out if you're putting a big down payment down. And then all of a sudden that buy down goes away. So it's really important that you have a lender that's explaining the opportunity cost on the buy downs, even if they're big, even if it's super pretty at 4% or whatever. Life happens. And so we have to understand how long it's going to take to make up that. So if we're using $40,000 to buy down, how much are we saving each month? And how many months will it take to, break even on that discount that we're getting? And pay attention to that, because we're not pushing this enough. If you're moving to a new build community, especially in an area where new builds are going to be the thing for the time to come, like, you have to be comfortable staying in that property or having the opportunity to move and use it as a rental at some point. And that's where we have to understand what we're looking like. And we can't predict the future. Job change, death, divorce, babies, diamonds, whatever you want to call it, diapers and diamonds. Like, we have to understand that life changes, but we have to look at this as an opportunity to move. Yes, it's great. Yes, that monthly payment looks great. But could it be a little bit higher, and you have the flexibility to get out of this home at some point for a profit, even, in the short term, should something happen? Or, on the flip side, is this monthly payment with the taxes and everything included sustainable enough where if we had to, we could rent it, right? The only time that doesn't work is when there's a divorce and, something goes wrong. Never met a divorced couple that wants to manage rental properties together. So that's something to consider. So if you have questions about this, let's talk. I'm not by any means saying new build is not the way to go. And I'm not by any means saying these incentives aren't, appealing. But what I do want you to understand is, what are we actually looking at? What's the best move for me? And can we talk about that? Right. And that's where negotiation comes in, because for the longest time, new builds were saying, this is what we're paying agents. This is what it's worth. Take it or leave it. We'll write the contract. Now they need us. Now they're saying, oh, we'll pay your agent a bonus. We'll do this. We'll do that, which is extremely a whole other conversation with the NAR lawsuits that we don't need to get into right now. But as we move forward and we move the needle, let's have some negotiation power. And as a buyer, are you able to walk in there and negotiate and understand what you're doing and all of that? Or does it make sense to hire an agent that the builder is, paying greatly for right now at the time of this recording? And like, if you walk in and you say, I want to buy that house, and they say, do you have an agent? And you say no, they're not going to offer you what they're offering the agent. And you're not going to have representation against them and their attorneys who wrote the contracts and their contracts. And you're not going to get anything changed as far as the legal jargon of the contract. It's very builder heavy. But what you can do is get some of the terms changed. Or what's this look like? What incentives do you have to sell these homes at the end of the quarter because, XYZ? These are things that you can negotiate right now that you need to understand. And having an agent right now with what the builders are offering and the bonuses and things could be free to you. In all honesty, yes, it's your money coming to the table, but this is something that you need to understand. And if you're savvy enough and you want to try and negotiate, first thing I would say is, hey, you're going to pay an agent 3%, plus a bonus, like, take that off the price and then give me that incentive too on top of it. Free advice. I'm just telling you, that's what I would say. But, the negotiation piece, the understanding of that, and then we move forward. And every builder that I've talked to, every salesperson is like, oh, you don't need a third-party inspection. It's inspected by the city. It's inspected by that. It's been every single inspection that I have had a third-party inspection before the, transaction has found something that could have been a major headache. So pay that extra money, have that representation, hire a good inspector, call me if you need to. Preferably call me before you go into the new build office so that I can represent you and we can get you the very best deal. But if you're at the inspection point, do the inspection. Have somebody that understands homes look at the final product for you before you pay $500,000, $1 million for it. It just makes sense. I am telling you that I have never had somebody pay for an inspection on a new build where it was like everything's perfect. And I've also never had somebody who didn't opt to do that I've told to, that doesn't regret not doing it, right? Because yes, they hide behind the warranty and that's great, but you're living there. You've already made the commitment to pay, and that's what we need to fully understand. So I get it. We're going to turn the tide a little bit here as far as opportunity goes with new builds. This is absolutely the case. So let's talk a little bit about resale versus new build. What are some pros and cons? Do the old school, put them on a list. Let's have a conversation, right? New builds, you're going to have a new house that's never been lived in. Typically on the modern side of finishes, you're going to have sometimes appliances, sometimes not. Most of the time, you're not going to have window coverings, right? Window coverings are expensive. That's something to consider. Most of the time, you're not going to have backyard landscaping. You're going to have rules, and they're going to tell you how to do it, but they're not going to put it in. And if they are, they're using some of the incentive to put that in, right? So you have to do that. You're not going to have a fence. These things are expensive, and they come into play. So make sure you're weighing that and the cost, because a backyard irrigation system, a fence and blinds for a new 4,000 square foot home could be pretty much what that incentive buy down is, and so then you're in a whole other situation. And so know that those costs exist. Know that that's part of it. The other thing is concrete and foundations. And yes, you have warranties, and I get it, but concrete breaks. I've had more problems with new build concrete than I can count on one hand. I'll tell you that. So you have to understand that these things happen. A 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old house, it's pretty much done its movement as long as you keep it where it's at. So you have the full story when you're purchasing that. So some of those risks do outweigh those incentives, and yes, it's not a new build house, but a resale house shows its true colors. You know what's going on. Typically, it's not just the base level appliances that, were all bought at the same time. So they're all going to crash out at the same time. That's all stuff that you have to consider, because ultimately as an investment, we need to make sure that we, are spacing out those capital improvements. We're spacing out all of that. We don't want a refrigerator, a dishwasher, a stove, all to go bad at the same time. Not to say they do, but I've heard crazier stories. So all of that said, yes, at the end of the day, and some of you might be screaming this, none of you have commented yet, but at the end of the day, what's it worth for you? What's it worth for you to have a brand new house? And does it make sense to move, maybe 30, 40 minutes north? Or does it make sense to move from Old Town, Fort Collins out of the mix a little bit to some of these new suburban, new build homes? That's totally your call, but what's that life look like? Yes, there's less traffic. Yes, in Fort Collins, there's college kids. In Greeley, there's college kids. In Severance, probably not as many, right? More family homes, whatever you want to talk about. But those are all things that come into play because, okay, then there's one grocery store. There's not all the, restaurants there, and the restaurants are here and they're building them, they're growing them. I know that there's spots, but what's the lifestyle look like? Let's take a look at that. If you're moving from Denver to Fort Collins or to Northern Colorado, Windsor, what's that look like to you, and what lifestyle are you looking for? Because ultimately, right now, it feels like everyone's pushing the interest rate first and not talking about the lifestyle. And that's where the problem comes in. You say, Jeremy, well, yeah, I get it. Like the parks, the concert series. Yeah, it's all great. But if we're pushing the interest rate and we're moving our family or making a financial decision based on an interest rate that we probably don't fully understand what the full effects are, and that we actually paid for it anyways in our mortgage over 360 payments, what does that look like? Right. And I promise you, if you're focused on just that, you're going to make a decision and you're going to call me in 2 to 5 years and say, hey, Jeremy, I'm ready to move. And depending on where you go, depending on the improvements you pick, depending on the amount of money you can put into, blinds and, nice window coverings, or do you do the paper ones? Right. I've sold former new builds with paper blinds on the windows still. Right. And so on one hand, we're like, oh, we want all this nice new stuff, but then are we able to afford it? And are we educated on the point that this is what it comes with? And the answer is typically not fully educated all the time. And so as you're considering this piece is just kind of understand that, yes, the 3.99% interest rate makes that monthly payment look really good. What are the other costs? What are the opportunities? What happens if I do have to move? What happens if I do have to make a move? Are you willing to rent the home out and take a loss? Or is the incentive so good that you could probably break even cash flow? Maybe that's an investment strategy. Maybe that flips the script and all of a sudden you're ready to go and start building some investments, house hacking. That's the conversation that you and I need to have, or you and your agent need to have, before you walk in blindly to something like a great incentive on a new build. So I hope that you take this in. I hope you know that I'm not anti new build. I just think it's very interesting that no one's talking about this, that we're technically, kind of staying pretty even, maybe going up a little bit. And, we're just hammering these incentives and we're financing these incentives, because to me, that means that we're paying, the builder is making the same amount of money. So we are paying more for a home that that's not selling unless you offer these $40,000 discounts. And that's where I get a little bit scared if we're not willing to do it. And just like a resale, if the market crashes or decreases, if you don't have to sell, don't sell. That's the secret, because real estate will always come back, historically proven, that, if you just hold on to the investment, you'll be okay. Just as if you bought a house in 2007, before the crash, the day before everything fell off the map, and you still own it, well, now you're doing okay, right? But it's been a minute. It's been a few years since that happened. So we just want to work through that. We want to make sure we're making smart decisions. And a lot of times the new build, pressure, there's a salesperson, there's all this pretty stuff. The model homes look like, gold, and we just kind of get sucked in. And at the end of the day, we can't even afford the upgrades that are in the model home. And I've had clients buy model homes and they've actually moved shortly thereafter because they didn't like it all. So there's pros and cons to everything. Build your list. Let's have a conversation. Please like and comment on this video. Please subscribe. I'm doing these live over on YouTube as well, trying to grow that. But I just want you to know that buying a new build is not just a walk in the park. It's not easy. They do make it so you can walk in there, you can just sign the contract and move on. But that is, at the end of the day, a contract that you are binded to, that has consequences if something were to happen, if something were to go wrong. And yes, their lenders make mistakes just like every other lender. So sometimes your earnest money is at risk in that time frame. So make sure you know what you're getting into. Make sure you're understanding the contracts you're signing, and make sure you're understanding the opportunity you have to have representation through this process. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.